just need to move something out of the way here. Right. Well, good evening. I'm Craig Macadam. I'm Conservation Director with Buglife, the Invertebrate Conservation Trust. And it's great to see so many of you at this talk. And before I start talking about PotWatch and Flatworms, I'm just going to give you a little introduction to Buglife for those of you that don't know the organisation. So it moves on. So Buglife is the only organisation in Europe concerned with the conservation of all invertebrates. We conserve everything from spiders to starfish, mollusks to mayflies. Our aim is to halt invertebrate extinctions and achieve sustainable populations of invertebrates in the UK. And we also work abroad as well. We've worked in Tanzania, Sri Lanka, St. Helena, South Georgia, and a few other places. We try and achieve our aim through a number of activities. We inspire others by introducing them to the world of invertebrates about them, get out there and show them the invertebrates all around them. We undertake practical conservation activities such as this bog restoration project in the top right, or the creation of wildflower areas for pollinators. We shape policy through advocacy efforts and the development of position papers and strategies. And we raise awareness through walks and talks, workshops and media stories, just like this one today. That's a little bit about Buglife. I'll now just start with the flatworms. And many people don't realise that we actually have some native land flatworms in this country. There are 5, possibly 6 species, which are mostly quite small. They're about 1 to 3 centimetres in length, and typically live amongst leaf litter. You can see a selection of them here. They're quite glossy looking. They're like worms. A lot of people confuse them with baby slugs. However, unlike slugs, these flatworms don't have stalked tentacles, retractable tentacles on their heads. So their heads are completely devoid of any structure, just a pair of eyes in these ones. What I'm really going to be talking about today is about non-native flatworms. So what's the problem with non-native flatworms? Well, since the 1960s, the number of non-native species arriving in the UK has absolutely rocketed. Many of these species are fairly benign, but for a small proportion, they become invasive, and that means that they'll outcompete native species, they'll prey upon native wildlife, and invasive plants will choke waterways and overgrow riverbanks. We've all heard of the problems of Japanese knotweed. Well, this graph is actually from the government's official indicator on non-native species, and you can see that every decade since the 1960s, we've seen an increase in the number of species arriving in Great Britain. The numbers are far greater in the terrestrial environment than the marine freshwater environments, although in the freshwater environment, the impacts can be slightly greater because it's such an enclosed environment than the open countryside. There's a number of routes for these, or pathways for these species to enter the country. The one I'm going to focus on today is the horticultural trade. Last year, the UK imported nearly 420,000 tonnes of live plants. The vast majority of these arrive from the Netherlands, but some come from much further afield. And the trend over the recent years is increasing, as you can see from this graph. The interesting thing on this graph is actually that big peak in 2001, and it made us think, what on earth happened in 2001 that might have meant that we imported more live plants to the UK? And we realised that this is the impact of foot and mouth disease on production of live plants in the UK. So the increase in number of plants that came from the Netherlands in there, it doubled overnight. But you can see that the trend for this is rising, and we'll soon be over 420,000 tonnes. And if you look at the number of flatworms arriving in the country, and this is a graph just showing the arrival of flatworms in the country. We've now, you can see that we had some very early colonizers, and the first ones in the 1870s through to the 1900s early 1900s were in hothouses and greenhouses, and particularly at Botanic Gardens at Kew. And then you can see that as we got to the 1960s, there then became a big increase, and roughly speaking, there's 1 or 2 species per decade arriving in the UK. We've now got at least 14 non-native species in the UK, and what I'm going to do for the majority of this talk is to just talk you through some of them and just show you some images of them, and then at the end I'll talk a bit about our 2 surveys that we're doing. Probably the most well-known non-native flatworm is the New Zealand flatworm. This is Arthundendus triangulatus. It's, as the common name suggests, this species originates from New Zealand. You can see it's a brown animal. It's flattened with paler edges that are slightly mottled, and it grows to about 20 centimeters long. This feeds on earthworms, like many flatworms do, and how it does that is it releases an enzyme. It finds a flatworm, and finds an earthworm, and then goes over the top of that earthworm and releases an enzyme which digests the flatworm. The earthworm digests the flatworm. Digests the earthworm, and then the flatworm will suck it up like a soup, an earthworm soup. And most of the species use that as a method of feeding. The inset here shows a typical egg capsule of the New Zealand flatworm, which looks a bit like a blackcurrant. Is just slightly smaller than that, is about the same size or just slightly smaller than a blackcurrant. Other species have similarly shaped egg capsules, but they vary in size, and some can be a lot smaller. Each of these capsules holds about 5 to 10 juveniles, and they'll hatch out and then develop into an adult flatworm. Some flatworms, however, can also reproduce through fission, where they actually split in half, or a small portion of their body detaches and then regenerates into a fully formed adult flatworm. Which obviously those species are even more invasive, because they just need to split, and then they can create new flatworms at will. The New Zealand flatworm is quite widespread now, but this next slide shows just the history of its invasion of the UK, or of Great Britain. You see, it was first found at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh in 1965, and then within 15 years it spread into Tayside and to the west of Scotland. It established quite well there, and by 1994 it was widespread across Scotland, and it started to crop up in England as well. You can see in the 1990s there that it's reached right to the top of Scotland, actually onto Orkney as well, really consolidated in the central belt area. And then now, if we're bringing it right up to date, the map on the side there is the 2014 distribution, where you can see that it's widespread across northern areas. It's also found in Northern Ireland. It was found in Northern Ireland in 1969. And it's also found to a lesser degree in the south of England. Okay, so just before we move on to look at some species, just a little bit about a basic identification of flatworms, terrestrial flatworms. I should point out that there are freshwater flatworms as well, but that's a whole different talk, which we might do at some point. But basic identification is there's 3 main families of flatworm found in the UK. The first one is dead easy to identify. It's got this half-moon shaped head, and that's the Bipalidae. There's one species, Bipalium coense, which, as you may have guessed, was first found and described from Kew Gardens. And that head is really distinctive. The next one, the Rhynchodemidae, this contains all our native species. So all those species that are listed there, apart from the bottom one, Dolichoplana and Striata, are native flatworms. And these have got a more pointed head, In the case of Rhynchodemus sylvaticus, that's the one with the very pointed head and the two eyes just slightly down from the tip. But all these species only have 2 eyes. And then the final family is the one that contains most of the non-native species. This is the Geoplanidae, and these have many eyes, and sometimes they have eyes right the way around the edge of the animal. They can be quite difficult to see the eyes because the colour of the pigment sometimes obscures them, but under a microscope you should be able to see some of the features. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through just giving you showing you some images of these species, and just give you a little bit about what they look like and how they feed and the like. First one was the moon flatworm I mentioned there, Bipalium cuense. This species is can grow up to about 35 centimeters long, so it's fairly long as a flatworm. And most flatworms are long and thin when they're extended, and then when they contract, they're sort of plump and a bit more yeah, I suppose. This one originates from Southeast Asia, and it feeds on earthworms. It was first found in the Botanic Gardens at Kew, but now there are scattered records across the UK. It's a sort of buff-coloured flatworm with sort of deep purple stripes, and the head is, as I said, is like semicircular shape with eyes all around the rim of it. The Australian flatworm is completely different. As you can see, it's got a much longer, thinner head. This grows up to about 8 centimeters long, and as the name suggests, comes from Australia. It also feeds on flatworms, and it's fairly widespread in southwest England. We've had records this year from Cornwall and from Devon, but it's also found in Wales and in northwest England in lower numbers. When it's fed, when it's been feeding, it's got this lovely pinkish colour, pinkish orange colour. It's also, as we'll go on, we'll see that some of these flatworms are flat, some are quite rounded, and some are flatter than others. This one is fairly flattened as a species. This is the Obama flatworm, Obama nungara, and Obama means leaf animal in Brazilian. This grows up to 7 centimeters long. Originates from Brazil and also feeds on earthworms. It's flattened and it's leaf-like sort of shape, and it's dark brown. You can just about see there's darker streaks or darker black streaks on the animal as well. The scatters records in England, Scotland and Wales, and it's certainly one that seems to be becoming established. It first arrived in the country in, I think it was 2014. And it's turning up more and more often now. This one here is the yellow striped flatworm, Plana variegata. Again, this one's quite a large one, can be up to 20 centimeters long, and originates from Australia. This one is a bit squarish in cross section, and it's got this dark mahogany brown base color with these distinctive yellow stripes. And within that yellow stripe is these 2 thin brown lines as well. So quite a very distinctive species. It feeds on a wide variety of arthropods, but not earthworms in this case. And again, this scattered records across England, Scotland, and Wales. In the same genus, Caenoplana corollia is, as the species name suggests, it's got a blue tinge to it. It's a dark purplish brown overall, but on the underside, which you can about see here, has got an intensive sort of blue colour. This one's smaller than the previous one. It's only up to 3.5 centimeters long, originates from Australia, and this one feeds on snails. And there's only one location I'm aware of, which is a hothouse in Liverpool. And so you can see many of these species are actually restricted to hothouses, but they are still an issue because they can escape from those areas and can find small pockets of area where it's suitable habitat for them. This one here is Australopacifica coxii. This is a much smaller one. It's about 2 centimeters long, from Australia. We don't know what this one feeds upon. There are records from Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. This one is more cylindrical or oval in cross section. It's a black colour, and it has these sort of like 2 narrow blue lines that go from head to tail. It's also got, if you look very closely at it under a microscope, you see tiny little iridescent blue flecks on the body as well. So these next 2 species are both in the genus Contychia. This is Contychia ventrolineata, which is around 2 centimeters long. It feeds on slugs and snails, and is widespread in Western England. It's again oval in cross section, and you can see here it's black to greyish sort of black colour with 2 pale grey lines close to the midline. The other Contychia species is a lot lighter. This is Contychia, the brown Contychia flatworm, Contychia andersoni, which grows up to 2.5 centimeters long. Again, this is oval in cross section, and it's got this pale brown color with 2 or 3 rows of dark brown flecks. This one, again, we don't know where this one actually originates from or what its diet is, but it has been found in small numbers in Cornwall and on the Isles of Scilly, and there's one or two records in Northern Ireland as well. Australopacifica atrata is a newcomer. This has only arrived in the last maybe 3 or 4 years. It's a fairly small species, up to 3 centimeters long. Feeds on anything dead. There's records of it feeding on dead mice and all sorts. It's a fairly widespread, like omnivorous detritivore. There's a handful of records in the south of England, but this is one that is likely to establish itself fairly rapidly because it's unfussy about what it eats in its habitat. It's quite shiny black on its dorsal surface, and ventrally it's got a series of 3 dark lines. I mean, this one, when I've seen this looks like a leech, and people would say this was a leech, but because of the really dark black colour, but definitely a flatworm. Artiapostea exulans. This one is small as well, 2 centimeters long, and is only found in Cornwall. Its origin is New Zealand, and when it's extended, it's really quite slender, and this is partially extended. It's got a broad, really well-defined brown strip on its back, and the rest of it is a dirty sort of white-brown background with little flecks of brown. This species here, again, is relatively new. Marion and Pfeiffer adventor. This is tiny. This is, if you're lucky, it'll be 1 centimeter long. It's from New Zealand. We don't know an awful lot about it, but it seems to be quite widespread. It's got this sort of patchy brownish background, and there's some bluish, almost iridescent spots on it. Quite funny because a lot of these species look quite pretty for a flatworm, but they all have a different side to them, if you like, in that they're preying upon native invertebrates. those are all those are the species that are present in the UK at the moment. There are perhaps up to 14 other species that are in Europe at the moment and on their way to the UK. Some of those are quite worrying. There's one called the New Guinea flatworm, which is pretty indiscriminate what it feeds on. It will quite happily feed on earthworms, snails, slugs, and could cause a real problem when it gets here. I think it's in France at the moment, so it's on its way here. That brings me on to what PotWatch is all about. So basically, PotWatch is a series of two surveys that we're running at Buglife. The first one is about how safe our garden centres are. So we have every year, every spring, hundreds upon hundreds of tons of plants come through into the UK from abroad into our garden centres. And with it, all those plants, none of those plants actually get checked to see if they're carrying anything. They get checked to make sure that they're healthy, checked to make sure that there's no plant disease. But the potting media and the actual plant itself, there's no checks done to see if there's anything living with that plant. And that's the big problem with this. It's not about stopping the trade in plants from abroad. It's about stopping the import of stowaways. So what we're looking for people to do is if you bought some plants from a garden centre, have a look at them, have a look through the soil that they're in when you're repotting them, and see if you find anything unusual. And it may not be a flatworm, it may be a snail, it could be some eggs, and what we're looking for is just for you to get in touch with us and tell us what you're finding. What we've found in the past, we ran this a couple of years ago, and we got some amazing things through. The Obama flatworm was one of the things that came up in this survey the last time we ran it. The other things we had two mole crickets came out of bamboo from Italy. Various beetles that we found, and one of them I don't think we were able to identify, and we're still trying to get identified. But yeah, so there's a huge number of different species that are coming in through this, and we would just like to get a handle on what those species are and just where they're coming from. So that's the web address for our survey there, and that allows you to put in where you purchased your plant and what it was and what the origin of it was, if that's listed. The other survey is to look at what flatworms are actually in our gardens, and the idea with this is just to find an area of your garden or an outdoor space, and just spend 10 minutes searching for flatworms. You need to look under anything that's damp and dark, places such as under wood or stones, plastic, or under plant pots. If you actually want to set something out to try and get flatworms to go under it, the best thing to do is to get a black bin bag and fill it up with some soil and just lay it on the ground, and that will spread out, and then the flatworms will actually go underneath that. They like to be quite tight underneath there. They don't like, it won't be under something that's maybe raised off the ground. They like to get really close to the ground and be protected. And again, that's the web address there. We want people to go onto our website and to let us know what they've found when they've done a flatworm survey. We want to see what other flatworms might be out there. And what we're working with the UK flatworm expert Hugh Jones to actually identify the things that people are finding. So we'll take records of any flatworms in that case, and in the PotWatch survey, anything you're finding in plants bought from gardens. So just to finish off with some further information, I'd like to thank Hugh Jones, who's helped a lot with this presentation, just providing some information, advice, and images for our PotWatch survey and for this presentation. He has got a YouTube channel which has a couple of videos on it of flatworms doing their thing. It's Flatworm Zoo if you want to have a look for that. He also published an article in British Wildlife, which is, if you look for British land flatworms in Google or any other search engine, you'll find that it's been put, put up online by various organisations in the past. So you can actually get an article that tells you a little bit more about those species that I've gone through there. David Fennick at photofauna.com, he has lots of photos of the flatworms that are found in Cornwall, and they show different views of those flatworms, you know, the undersides and them as they're going about their business. And then, as I said in that previous slide, the Buglife website, if you look for PotWatch on there in the campaign section, you'll get more information. We've also got a flatworm ID guide there as well, if you want to have a go at that. And my email address is there. If anybody's got any questions about flatworms or other non-native species, please do get in touch. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Craig. If anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the chat box now. We've got a few in there already. Or you can raise your hands as I was going through before. So if you click on participants, then there's the option to raise your hand there. So Craig, Keith did ask earlier on, and you just mentioned it. He was asking if there's a good ID guide for flatworms. You said there's one on the website.
We've got one that that allows you to ID the more common ones. Hugh Jones' article in British Wildlife gives you all the species that were known in 2005, and I think Hugh also has an update to that on the web somewhere, which I could probably dig out. But the main thing is, it's much of it is down to stepping out into those three families that I showed by the number of eyes and the shape of the head, and then looking at the colour and the pattern. They're fairly distinctive, the ones that we've got.
Brilliant, thank
I
you.
can add in some breaking news there, Holly, as well.
Ooh.
I know that there have been conversations with Hugh about producing a garden flatworms guide with the FSC, because it's been done in conjunction with the garden earthworms one. I don't know where that's at, but there might be something coming in the not too distant future from us on that as well.
That'd be good. That'd be excellent.
Okay, and we've got another question from Keith. He was asking, does anything predate these flatworms?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that birds will have a go at them, but I think they're pretty distasteful to birds. I know that the New Zealand flatworm, there was a chap that used to contact us to tell us how many he had in his garden on the west coast of Scotland, and he had huge numbers. I mean, he had, you know, he could quite easily collect 100 New Zealand flatworms in his garden overnight, and he used to feed them to his chickens, but they didn't really like them all that much.
Oh, dear. Okay, great, thank you. Graham was just asking for the survey. He assumes you only want terrestrial flatworms and not flatworms from the pond, because he's got loads in his pond.
No, just terrestrial ones. The ones in his pond are probably non-native as well, but that, like I said earlier on, that's a completely different talk.
Okay, thank you. Stephen was asking, what do our native flatworms eat?
That's a good question. So all of them are preying on small animals. So I think the majority of the native ones actually feed on small arthropods, you know, like things like springtails and things. But I'd have to double check that.
No problem, thank you. Joe was asking, do any of our native flatworms also eat earthworms?
Again, I'd have to double check, but I don't think so. I think they're all rather small to be taking on an earthworm.
Yeah, thank you. And he was also asking, is there anything in particular that makes earthworms more vulnerable to non-native flatworms like the New Zealand flatworm?
Well, I think it's perhaps the other way around. The non-native flatworms are, you know, that is their prey, so they're going out and looking for them. They're living in the same type of habitats. They're living in damp habitats, and certainly in Scotland, when the New Zealand flatworm sort of took off in the sort of like 80s and 90s, there were records of very low numbers of earthworms, so they were really preying hard upon them. But they don't burrow, so they're on the surface, so they would rely on the earthworm coming up to the surface. So it's probably when it's wetter, it's always wet in Scotland. But yeah, they're coming up to the surface more often, and then the earthworm's able to prey upon them.
I see, thank you. Stephen's asking, how confident are you that the unknown origin species aren't actually native species?
It's a good question as well. So we have had some new native species described, and in fact there's one that may be a new species that's being described at the moment. They're all in the one family, apart from that, the Buglife striata, which is in that family. The genera of these other species are all from these other, from other places, mostly from Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. So they're not found anywhere near where the UK. We're really fairly confident that these species aren't actually native.
Well, thank you. Imogen was asking, with regards to PotWatch, are you using the relatively new EU plant passport scheme to help track where these flatworms are coming from?
We can, although because there's no checking on the actual, because the plant passport scheme is about the plant, it's not about what's in the pot, as it were. And the fact that the plant comes along with all this potting media, which can have anything in it, and nobody checks, the plant passport scheme isn't all that useful for doing that. We do, there are good records of where plants are coming from. The graph I showed you is HMRC data about imports of plants. And so there are good records about which countries we're getting plants from. The key problem is that there's no checks on what's actually coming in with the plant, just that the plant is healthy.
Okay, thank you. Jenny was asking, can you tell us more about the potential threat to our native species from these flatworms? You mentioned they eat earthworms and snails. So.
Yeah, so like I said, that when the New Zealand flatworm was at when it was reaching its peak in Scotland, there was a lot of concerns over the earthworm population in some areas, and in particular, lots of concerns from farmers about the problems that they would have if they lost earthworms from their fields. And certainly in some areas, I hear from people who say that they've not seen an earthworm in their garden for years, because they've got so many flatworms there. And of course, the flatworms, well, once they've fed on all the earthworms, the numbers of flatworms will decline. But the earthworms would take an incredibly long time to recover from that, I would suggest. The newer species that are coming in are feeding on. There's a few new species that are coming in that are now feeding on slugs and snails. That's their diet. And yeah, if we look at what's happened with other species, other non-native species, invasive non-native species, they can quite rapidly have a big impact on native fauna, particularly if they specialise in one particular type of animal.
Yeah, thank you. Fiona was asking, is there anything plant nurseries can do to help control or limit the spread of them? Or if they find them in their stock there? Yeah,
so I think there's two things with non-native species. You're trying to stop them arriving in the first place, and that's key. So we don't want any new species establishing, and we want to limit the reinforcement, if you like, of existing species, populations that are here. And then after that, it's about eradication. And as we've seen with sort of the Asian hornet, that stopping it arriving, there's a lot of effort going into actually eradicating the one or two individuals, nests that are establishing in the south of England. When a species is already well established, it's quite difficult to eradicate completely. And I think that's probably where we are with some of these species. particularly the New Zealand flatworm, Australian flatworm, we're probably at the stage where we wouldn't be able to eradicate it completely. But if we are making sure that garden centres and horticulturists, plant nurseries are not just looking at how healthy the plant is, but what else is with that plant, and making sure that they're removing any foreign bodies, stowaways from those plants before they're on sale, that would certainly make a big difference to stopping the spread to other areas. It's really about good biosecurity. You know, we're very good at making sure that we don't spread plant pathogens and things around, but we're just not doing the same for these animals.
Yeah, thank you. Lawrence was asking, how is a flatworm defined in this context? Are they a phylum, for example?
So they're in the family Planaridae, and they are in the Tricladidae, which I don't know what taxonomic rank that is. It's probably a class within the phylum Platyhelminth, is it? I need to double check actually.
Yeah, the phylum is Platyhelminthes, which is general flatworms. I don't know how they divide up when you get to terrestrial, marine, and
no, well, it's Tricladidae and then Planaridae. So Planaridae is the family that they're all in.
Oh,
Sorry, no, it's not. They're in the 3 different families. Planaridae is the freshwater ones, and then the terrestrial ones are the 3 families that I mentioned there.
Great, thank you. Graham was asking, do you think it's possible that the flatworms are being spread around by predators, for example, in bird droppings?
Well, so that's an interesting one, because certainly the ones that can develop by fission, if they could survive the digestive tract of a bird, then potentially yes, they could. And there's not many of them that can reproduce by fission, but most of them have the egg capsules. But yeah, it is possible. They could also be getting transferred on the sort of like on animals, on the fur of animals and things like that. They're fairly sticky type things.
Thank you. Joanne was asking, do the non-native flatworms carry any parasites that we know about?
I don't know. No idea.
No problem. Stephen's asking, is there any viable earthworm populations in areas / regions where these non-native flatworms are native to?
Again, I'm not sure. I'm guessing there are earthworms in New Zealand and Australia, but I don't. Thanks, Kieran. But I'm not sure what the interaction is there between them and the flatworms.
Yeah,
it's probably worth pointing out that in those environments, our earthworms will probably be present, possibly as invasive species as well. So because we've colonized New Zealand and Australia a long time ago and taken a lot of our plants over with us, it's a two-way street. We don't just receive invasive species. Something that's often not as reported as well in a country are the invasives that we export, and our earthworm species are actually extremely invasive throughout the rest of the world. We don't have any invasive earthworm species in the UK, but ours are externally. So I wouldn't be surprised if in New Zealand and Australia they're also feeding on the same species or have already adapted to feed on the same species.
you muted yourself then, Kieran, just at the end. Did we miss anything?
Yeah, I'd finished, but maybe there was a delay on my...
Oh, sorry, it might have been my connection. We've had a couple of questions as well from Terry and Fiona, just asking, do you go out to sort of gardening groups and target sort of those sort of keen gardeners at all to help educate them about these flatworms, to keep an eye out for them?
Yeah, we've been trying to get in touch with some of the gardening societies and talk to them about this as well. We're relaunching our PotWatch survey, our Flatworm survey this autumn, where we'll be getting that out there. When we did it last time, we got quite a lot of good press coverage, which was great, and we got a lot of records in. Like I said, we've got some really odd things like mole crickets. There was I think there was 2 or 3 mole crickets that all came in through the same route, which was in bamboo from south of Italy. And we don't know if it originated from Italy or whether it had come elsewhere, but it come through bamboo from the south of Italy, and it had come through, I think it was Home Base or somewhere like that. They were all from the same source. So yeah, and so there's a couple of people that ate mole crickets for a wee while.
That's bizarre. Thank you. I think we're on our last question. Oh no, we've had a couple more come in. So Rhiannon was just asking, are these non-native flatworms a direct threat to our native flatworms?
To our native flatworms, I don't think to our native flatworms, but to our earthworms, yes.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Sarah's just messaged me saying she's found 5 non-native flatworms in her garden in Bournemouth. What should she have done with them?
So we would like to know what they are. So first off is to take them, put them into a small container, and then try and get a photograph of them. You don't want them to stay in your garden, and this will sound strange coming from an invertebrate conservation charity, but the best thing you can do is to kill them. Once you've got them identified, you can keep them alive. I mean, I think there's a bit, one of Charles Darwin's diaries talks about him keeping a flatworm alive for 2 years, just by feeding it bits of rotten log and invertebrates. So they make lovely pets. No. So yes, so it may sound a bit weird coming from an invertebrate conservation charity, but the best thing is to kill them, and that's not as simple as cutting them up, or because obviously with ones that can develop through fission, that's going to just create more flatworms.
I put them into salted water.
Yeah, so
and then they just completely disintegrated.
Yeah, so people use salted water, or they use hot water, or they crush them between 2 stones. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I did the right thing then.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Sarah. And I think we've got to the end of our quest. Oh, well, no, one more from Stephen. Right, I'll make this the last one. So this is actually going back to mole crickets that you mentioned. He's asking, are mole crickets native to the Mediterranean area, or would they have arrived in Italy from somewhere else?
So mole crickets are native to the UK, and we do have mole crickets. They're incredibly rare, and I don't know if there are many records every year of them. But there are several species in the genus, and there's a particular Mediterranean species, which I think that's why we think we know it came from Italy, and we knew that they were not quite the same as the ones that were in the UK. Yes, they are native to the Mediterranean area, but there are several species in the Mediterranean area, and we only have the one species in the UK. And like I say, it is incredibly rare. There's been very few records of it in the last 10 years.
Well, thank you. Right, well, that's it, everyone. So thank you, Craig, for taking time out to talk to us today and sharing your knowledge. And thank you for everyone else that's joined us as well this evening. Hope you found it useful. I'll send around those links that Craig mentioned before to the PotWatch survey and to the ID guide on their website. And yeah, that's it. So thank you all for coming. You can unmute yourself to say bye if you like, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. So bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.